Hello everyone! Today is an exciting day because Arch Tempered Nu Udra is finally here, and it has actually brought us some exciting gear that improves just about every build we could make previously. So in this video, I'm going to go over 4 different specialized builds. We're going to have your standard max DPS set, of course, a group focus set that has resonance, a tank set for those of you that like to use the Blackest Knight, and yet another max DPS set that will utilize Darkside for the highest damage possible. In addition to that, all of the sets will have Perfect Charm and Craftable Charm variants, except for the last one. Timestamps are included, so use them. Getting into the first build, we have a pretty standard max DPS set, but this build is quite interesting because we're actually making use of 3 different set bonuses, those being Bad Blood, Dark Arts, and Guts Tenacity. So not only are we getting the extra damage from the energy waves on Dark Arts, but we're also getting some extra damage procs from Bad Blood as well, all while not having to give up our massive damage buff from Guts. As for the actual skill list, it's pretty much the same as every other build. It has max latent power, so it's ideally best used on the more difficult content where the skill will actually activate, and we have max resentment as well thanks to the ridiculous skill point efficiency on the Nu Udra gear. So you'll want to make sure you take advantage of that as much as you can. Looking into the actual math behind this set, first we have to take our base raw of 225 and add our 7% multiplier from attack boost and guts, which will give us 240. Then when we add all the skills that give us a flat attack increase, we will end up with 284. Multiply that by white sharpness and we get 375. But when we account for our affinity and critical boost, that becomes 494. However, this doesn't include all the extra damage we're getting from Dark Arts or Bad Blood. I don't actually know how much damage either of those is worth exactly, but I think it's pretty realistic to assume Dark Arts can be worth a good 7.5% more damage, so then our total would become 531. As for Bad Blood though, your guess is as good as mine. It doesn't do much damage, but it's there and that's good enough for me. Moving on to the Craftable Charm variant of the set, we actually don't lose out on that much damage by not having a perfect charm. We do of course still lose attack boost 4, but we gain 2 agitator instead, which honestly goes a long way towards closing that damage gap. For the math on this set, we again have to take our 225 base raw and multiply for guts, which will end up giving us 236, which becomes 278 once we add up all the flat damage skills. White sharpness then turns that into 267, and when accounting for affinity and critical boost, a total of 488, or 525 after we add the 7.5% for Dark Arts. Up next we have the Resonance set, which is honestly my preferred set if I'm keeping it real. Being able to buff your party's damage by simply being next to them or keeping your distance depending on which mode you're in is a fantastic mechanic if you ask me, and I quite enjoy using it. The set doesn't lose any damage over the previous sets either. In fact, it gains both for you and your party, so it's extremely powerful, but of course relies on resonance, so this isn't going to work if you're playing true solo. Other than that, the set is basically the same as every other resonance set, except it swaps guts for dark arts, because you can only have one or the other alongside resonance, and believe it or not, dark arts is actually better damage output. Those energy waves are pretty crazy. Getting into the calculations for this set, we have 225 base raw, increased by 2% for attack boost, which becomes 229. Add up all the flat damage skills and that turns into 279. Then multiplied by white sharpness is 368, so when we account for our affinity and critical boost, we get a total of 503, or 541 after dark arts. As for the Craftable Charm variant of the Resonance set, we of course have to make do with a Craftable Charm, so attack boost 4 is just not going to work. On the bright side of things though, we are able to close that damage gap quite considerably yet again, by gaining a 5th point of Agitator, which is actually the most valuable point, alongside another point of resentment as well. Looking at the calculations for this set, we got our 225 base raw with no multipliers this time, so we're just adding up our flat damage skills, which works out to 271. Multiplied by white sharpness is 357, or 486 after accounting for our affinity and critical boost. So with dark arts that comes out to a total of 523. It is also worth mentioning that this set gets 1 point of burst for free as well that I didn't account for. So this set will be even slightly stronger than that depending on how well you can keep burst active. Alright, so getting into the tank set, this build is basically going to be all about having as much damage as you can possibly get, while still having 4 pieces of Bale. Therefore giving you the Blackest Knight, which will give you the safety of that counter, as well as the double defense and health on hit buff that it provides. Now despite this being a tank build and us actually using 5 pieces of Bale instead of just the standard 4 that is required, this build has a lot of room to fit in damage skills, thanks to the Bale armor being more skill efficient than most people give it credit for. I mean, it's so skill efficient it was actually optimal to use the whole set for this build, which was quite surprising. Looking at the skill list, you can see Constitution, Latent Power, Counter-Strike, Maximum Might, and even Quick Sheath are all maxed out. We even got Agitator halfway there as well. So the build is definitely not one to be slept on, especially if you're a fan of the Blackest Knight. So the math for this set is 225 base raw, increased by 2% for attack boost, which works out to 229. All of the flat damage skills then bring that up to 276, and when multiplied by white sharpness that becomes 364. Once we account for our affinity and critical boost, that then turns into 474, or 510 after dark arts. Moving on to the Craftable Charm variant of the tank set, unfortunately we are going to struggle a little bit here. We always lose our attack boost 4 when we opt for a Craftable Charm, but we usually gain 2 points of other powerful skills in return to help make up for it. That's not going to happen this time around though, because of how the skill points are situated on all of the armor pieces. Basically all of the skills except for Agitator are at level 3 or above, even without decos or a charm. So adding 3 levels of something from a charm is going to put something at level 6, and there's no Agitator 3 charm. So we are doomed to waste one of our precious skill points no matter what. The best we can do is gain 2 points of Agitator, bringing us up to 5, at the cost of 1 resentment. The math behind this set is 225 base raw and no multipliers, so we're just adding all the flat damage skills, which works out to 269. Nice. Multiplied by white sharpness is 355, account for affinity and critical boost, and that becomes 470 or 505 after dark arts. As for the Darkside set, this is going to be the highest damage set in this video, but it's important to keep in mind that this build is going to cause you to take damage as you attack, and it's also going to require a very specific charm in order to work properly. So you may not even be able to make this set. But with that said, this build is very similar to the first build, except we are using the True Shadow Bringer, which is going to increase our resentment uptime, and therefore our total damage output, thanks to the health drain it provides. So the math, 220 base raw this time, and we need to add 5% more for guts, which turns out to 231. Add up all the flat damage skills and that becomes 293. Multiply that by white sharpness and we get 367. Then when we add an affinity and critical boost, that turns into 512 or 551 after dark arts, which is an absolute ton of damage. So those are the best Greatsword builds you should be using post Arch Tempered Nu Udra. Hopefully you found something that you like and can actually make. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and consider joining my Discord server at the same time. All of my builds get uploaded there first, so it's basically early access. But with that said, I'll see you in the next video.